Metal Gear Rising Revengeance is the most popular game in the Metal Gear series. It literally has a whole ass subreddit separate from the main Metal Gear subreddit. For a lot of hardcore fans, this fact is very frustrating. And that's understandable given just how much more there is to Metal Gear than Who's the Danger? The examination of a post-Cold War society in Metal Gear Solid 1.
We live in a sad age. Imperialism, totalitarianism, perestroika.
The prophetic nature of Metal Gear Solid 2's story.
The untested truths, spun by different interests, continue to churn and accumulate in the sandbox of political correctness and value systems.
The politics of the Cold War in the 60s were portrayed in Metal Gear Solid 3.
Since the Great Patriotic War, I have created countless weapons in the service of our great communist society.
The critique of the military-industrial complex in Metal Gear Solid 4.
It's an endless series of proxy battles, fought by mercenaries and machines. War, and its consumption of life, has become a well-oiled machine.
The list goes on, but you have to admit, it isn't a mistake that Metal Gear Rising Revengeance is as popular as it is. It actually makes a lot of sense when you actually dig deeper into it. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this video, regarding its opening specifically. So yeah, let's do that. Firstly, I have to reiterate the fact that there are two perspectives we have to keep in mind when examining Metal Gear Rising Revengeance: the newcomer and the veteran. Let's start with the newcomer. You were probably introduced to Metal Gear Rising Revengeance via a meme you saw while scrolling through a social media site. You're probably younger too, and never experienced Metal Gear Rising Revengeance when it initially came out, because you were probably in primary or middle school at the time of its release. You probably haven't played or experienced any other Metal Gear game, and your only familiarity with the series is Metal Gear Rising Revengeance and Rules of Nature! If none of that describes you as a newcomer, then you're probably just the average gamer checking out a game you purchased that you thought looked cool after seeing it discounted on Steam, not knowing anything about it or what series it's a part of. So you're probably going in blind. If you were or are a returning fan of the Metal Gear series, then your perspective is going to be a little bit different. Actually, no, it's going to be entirely different. You've probably played almost all the Metal Gear games that have been released up until this point. By this point, I mean 2013, the year Metal Gear Rising Revengeance came out. You either thought Metal Gear Solid 4 was the worst game in the series or the best. If you're in the "this is easily the worst Metal Gear Solid game" camp, then one of the reasons for that probably relates to the depiction of the character Raiden in that game. For those that don't know anything about this series that isn't Rules of Nature, Raiden is a Metal Gear character that was first introduced in Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. I don't have the time to get into his whole character arc because of Metal Gear Solid 2's convoluted nature, but all you need to know for this video is that in Metal Gear Solid 2, he is not the badass he's depicted to be in his later appearances. He doesn't even use a sword until the end of Metal Gear Solid 2. Speaking of the end of that game, a lot of people consider his character arc complete by the end of Metal Gear Solid 2. He's reunited with his wife after she was held hostage by the mysterious organization known as the Patriots. The ultimate message of his character arc is that he should determine his own destiny and choose what he wants to live and fight for.
Then what are you and Otacon fighting for?
A future. You can stop being part of a mistake, starting now.
What am I? What am I supposed to do?
Find something to believe in, and find it for yourself. And when you do, pass it on to the future.
Believe in what?
That's your problem. Come on.
This is what Solid Snake tells him, keeping in mind that in the past, throughout Raiden's life, his destiny was controlled only by others. This is something he absolutely needed to hear at this point in the story, and that's ultimately what he does at the end of the game. He decides to focus on his family and wife. But then, for some reason, Raiden makes a reappearance in Metal Gear Solid 4, this time as an acrobatic breakdancing cyborg? To say the least, a lot of people didn't like this decision, especially since it contradicts his character arc in Metal Gear Solid 2. But hey, at least it laid the groundwork for the most popular depiction of Raiden in Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. Regarding his character arc and ending in Metal Gear Solid 4, It's essentially a retread of Metal Gear Solid 2, so at the very least, it kinda satisfied the fans who were initially upset about him being in the game by giving them an ending that they're familiar with, right? But yeah, that's essentially the veteran perspective up until the release of Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. I should also add that Metal Gear Solid 4 is the last mainline game canonically and chronologically. Metal Gear Rising Revengeance is a spin-off, and it's also supposed to take place 4 years after the ending of Metal Gear Solid 4. It's also important to note that Rising Revengeance wasn't made by Kojima Productions. It was made by a studio called Platinum Games, the same studio that made Bayonetta and Vanquish, both unsurprisingly very spectacle-driven. Have you ever been on a roller coaster ride? If you have, you'd know that they're both very exhilarating and interesting. Some turn the adrenaline up to 11 at the beginning of the ride, blasting at warp speeds as soon as those safety restraints come down. Some utilize pacing and build-up with peaks and troughs of extreme speeds and its slowing down respectively. In that way, they're kinda like action movies, because some action movies start with the action and some utilize pacing. Focusing on pieces of media that start with action, Baby Driver serves as a good example. Which starts with a heist. Another good example would be The Matrix, which starts with a chase scene. Now imagine a video game doing exactly that.
Years. We've come so far in just 3 short years.
The sign of a strong leader, sir.
No. The will of a strong people. And one very able advisor.
Thank you, sir.
Your team deserves credit as well, Mr. Lightning Bolt.
Just doing our job, Mr. Prime Minister.
I must admit, I once thought of groups like yours as opportunists, enablers of war. But you've trained our new army well. Order has returned sooner than expected. Perhaps I was wrong about these private military companies.
We prefer private security providers, sir. Most of Maverick's contracts do focus on security.
Yes, well, the security can mean many things.
There's a saying I like. One sword keeps another in the sheath. Sometimes the threat of violence alone is a deterrent. Sometimes, by taking a life, others can be preserved. It's the code the samurai lived by.
A soldier and a philosopher. You are full of surprises, Mr. Lightning Bolt.
I could say the same about you, Mr. Prime Minister.
One sword keeps another in the sheath. Sometimes the threat of violence alone is a deterrent. Sometimes by taking a life, others can be preserved. I think that quote puts into words how Raiden feels throughout this whole game, and obviously at the beginning. Fighting to protect those who can't adequately defend themselves on their own is what Raiden ultimately chose as his destiny in this game. Furthermore, it also tells us that this version of Raiden is more willing to commit acts of extreme violence. Because if the threat of violence alone is a deterrent, is that any kind of ordinary violence? The Metal Gear series is notoriously violent, and almost all the characters in it are easily provoked into committing acts of violence. It doesn't take that long for Snake to start using that good old CQC, but Rising takes it to the next level, as we're about to see. Theoretically, the sword is supposed to keep the other in a sheath, because whoever is wielding the sword, in this example it's Raiden, really means business. So don't fuck with them unless you want your limbs sliced off. It doesn't only apply to Raiden either. It also applies to the villains in this game. Ultimately, you could say the quote prepares the audience for the version of Raiden we're about to see later in this opening, which for Veteran specifically is much, much different than the Raiden we saw in Metal Gear Solid 2 and even in Metal Gear Solid 4. I do think that there are more layers to the quote than just that, but I can't get into that in this video. I'll have to dig deeper into the themes of this game in a separate video about Raiden alone. So if you want to watch that, as soon as I eventually upload it, make sure you press that little red button reading subscribe next to my profile picture. Getting back on track, essentially everything I just said is basically a really long-winded way of saying the quote is an example of foreshadowing.
What is happening?
Someone's blocking the lead vehicle. Hold on.
Clear the road! This is official state business! I said clear the road! We're authorized to use force if you do!
Leopard 1, U-turn. Turning back.
Open fire! Who was that?
A cyborg.
One of our competitors? Courtney, what is happening?
We got hit, sir. A cyborg.
Whose?
Exif comes up unaffiliated.
I'll notify all checkpoints. Get on money out of there.
Yes, sir.
We are going to die.
Stay calm.
He's got friends on our 12s.
Raiden,
I'm on it. Guard the Prime Minister.
Immediately, the samurai quote is reaffirmed. My boy literally strikes a superhero pose.
Let's get this over with. You're Jack.
What do you want with the Prime Minister?
I want him dead. Nothing personal, of course. Africa's just getting a bit too peaceful.
What?
Business ain't been the same since they shut down SOP. A clean break from the war economy. Huh. Well, some of us like that economy. How's an honest warmonger supposed to make a living?
This is your answer? Don't do it!
Don't worry now. I won't. Not while he's still useful.
In this scene, the audience is introduced to the game's politics, which are obviously very anti-war, by depicting what is effectively a caricature of a jingoistic warmonger who just happens to have a similar, not the same, but a similar accent to a certain American president. You read between the lines.
So long.
That damn new Jeep. It still works?
Immediately, everything is turned up to 11. What would be the final boss of a regular Metal Gear game is what you have to fight in the first level. In a normal Metal Gear game, the action really only showed up in the later parts of the game, like after and or before the final boss fight. Every point before that, you were experiencing sophisticated, slow, subdued stealth gameplay with cutscenes in between. Like in Metal Gear Solid 2, for example, the Metal Gear Rays are the last boss fight before the actual final boss. And that boss fight was very fucking difficult. It took me like 40 minutes to beat it the first time. And that was with the difficulty set to normal. And you literally need a fucking rocket launcher to beat them up. They seemed so powerful and daunting in Metal Gear Solid 2. But in Rising Revengeance, this shit is child's play to both the player and Raiden. Regarding the newcomers, their minds were probably blown. You've probably never seen a Metal Gear Ray before, but even looking at it for the first time, your first impression is, wait, what's going on? Isn't this only the beginning of the game? Why are we fighting what looks like a final boss at the beginning of the game? Whatever the reason may be, I'm not complaining. You know, the breakdancing in Metal Gear Solid 4 was cool, but what about jumping on missiles, running from the top of a clock tower to cut a Metal Gear array in half, running across apartment buildings like it's nothing, and picking the beast up with your bare hands? At this point, I think the audience knows what they're in for the rest of this game. It's going to be Mission Impossible and speed levels of action the whole game through. That aside, let's talk about Raiden. In Metal Gear Solid 4, it seemed like Raiden was put in the position that he's in Metal Gear Solid 4 unwillingly. He was very depressed in that game, almost like he was forcing himself to take part in the game's plot. I think it would be accurate to say that in Metal Gear Solid 4, we were seeing a version of Raiden that doesn't have anything to believe in or fight for. While that fight with Vamp is very exciting, paying attention to Raiden's face, it seems like he doesn't know or care that he looks like an absolute badass breakdancing and shit. Rising Revengeance's Raiden is actually fighting for something, and it shows. And the samurai quote he used at the beginning reaffirms this. I'd say after Raiden jumps onto that train is when the opening section of this game ends. And that's when you get into the game proper. All in all, Metal Gear Rising sets the tone in the best possible way it could have done. Over-the-top action as soon as Raiden unsheaths his sword, some pretty salient politics with a goofy veneer. It's all in the opening, and it subverts expectations of what gamers typically expect a game to start with, and it perfectly encapsulates what the Metal Gear series is all about, while still establishing a uniquely separate identity from the mainline games. The folks over at Platinum Games made something really special with not just the opening, but the whole game. And that's also evident by the fact that it's very easy to appreciate as a veteran Metal Gear fan, because of all the thematic weight regarding Raiden, and that there are many people who have only played Rising and haven't played any of the Solid games. Which I understand why, but seriously, you guys should really play the other games. This series has a lot to offer beyond just Rising. On a side note, I really want to talk about how accurately what's presumably a West African city is portrayed in this game. Often in popular media, Africa, no matter the country and or city, is portrayed as some backwater, perpetually destitute continent full of huts and villages. Like, no lie, a lot of Westerners, and Easterners for that matter, think this, and only this is what Africa looks like, and think this, and only this is what Africans live in. When cities like Luanda and Angola and Abidjan in the Ivory Coast exist, and those are just two examples. Then here comes Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, depicting what looks like a city in West Africa specifically, with a surprising amount of accuracy. It looks like a combination of different cities in West Africa, including the capital of Ghana, Accra, with a little bit of Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou, mixed in, and a little bit of Abidjan. Yeah, I just wanted to point that out because it's a pleasant surprise coming from a game developed by a Japanese studio. Just more proof that Metal Gear Rising's introduction is absolutely flawless. You get some action-packed spectacle, plus an accurate portrayal of a West African city. The perfect package.